Hey grade 11, so today we are going to be continuing on with the immune system and we're going to be looking at our specific defense. So we looked last class at our first line of defense, our non-specific defense, so that was the first line of defense and the inflammatory response. And so those are non-specific because they work generally constantly throughout your body. So you're constantly trying to fight out some of those things by coughing, your stomach's always working, your inflammatory response, those macrophages and other phagocytes are just attacking whatever enters the body. There's no specificity. So with the specific defense, we are attacking one specific antigen. So we're going to look at that today. So if your first line of defense and your inflammatory response don't work, it's a good thing you have a specific defense system. So this uses antibodies and directly attacks the specific antigen. It takes 5 to 7 days for this system to fully engage for the first time, but once you've used this to fight off an antigen once, it's ready to go much quicker and you will not usually get sick from the same antigen again. So you might have heard like, okay, once you've had the chickenpox, you can never get them again. That's because you have those antibodies and you have that specific defense system so that it can attack the chickenpox antigens before you would get infected and get sick from them again. So just a little side note here, did you know that people used to have chickenpox parties? So basically, one kid in the neighborhood would have the chickenpox, and then all the other parents would bring their kid to get the chickenpox from that kid, because they knew that once they had them, they weren't going to get them again later in life. And getting the chickenpox later in life is way more hard to deal with, and you don't really want that as potentially a teenager or as an adult. So they would bring their kids, they would have them hang out with the kid that had the chickenpox and really hope that their kid would get the chickenpox. So this doesn't happen much anymore because we have a chickenpox vaccine and most kids get vaccinated early on in school so that they don't get the chickenpox at all. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how vaccines work later. But yeah, so this is why we have, again, a really funny image here, chickenpox party. Come one, come all, this is the pox box. So looking at our specific defense, we have two major players, and those are the B lymphocytes and the T lymphocytes, or B cells and T cells. So we're going to look at how those work today. So B cells work by receptors for a specific antigen on the outside, recognizing the antigen and creating antibodies for that specific antigen. They live in the lymph nodes and in the spleen, which we'll talk about later. And after recognizing a particular antigen, B cells clone themselves so they can create more of the B cell, which in turn creates more antibodies for that specific antigen. And this is antibody-mediated immunity. Okay, so what does that big blurb mean? We'll break it down here with these steps. So step 1, B cells in the body comes up to an antigen in the blood. Step 2 is the B cell begins to recognize the shape and makeup of that antigen. Step 3, the B cell creates antibodies that can attach to that specific antigen. Step 4, many B cells that recognize the specific antigen develop so they can create more antibodies. This is step 5. Antibodies attach to the antigen and neutralize it. So after we have these many B cells that are producing many of this specific antibody, the antibodies actually attach to the antigen and neutralize it. So this antigen can no longer reproduce. Basically, if something can't reproduce, it can't continue to infect you. So step 6, phagocytes come and destroy the neutralized antigen covered in the antibodies. So they come in, again, they eat kind of that antigen that's covered in those antibodies so that it can't reproduce, and then it cleans up that kind of waste material. So after all that's happened, specialized memory B cells are developed that remember the antigen and can make the B cell's response much faster in the future by replicating quick to create antibodies for that antigen. So we have these specialized memory B cells that keep floating around in your immune system, and anytime that they would come into contact with that specific antigen, because remember, they recognize the makeup and shape of the antigen, so they come into contact with that and they alert your system right away. We need to make B cells of this specific antigen so we can get rid of those right away. Our antibodies can be developed for this antigen, clear it out right away. So that's why you wouldn't get sick from it. Your specific immune system or your specific immune defense, starts reacting way quicker, not that 5 to 7 days. It happens really quick so that you don't have to, or you can't get sick from that again. The antibodies help to destroy it really quickly. So T cells do not use antibodies. They are the attackers on their own. So other white blood cells or an infected cell present the T cell with a specific antigen. The T cells develop receptors that can recognize the antigen. The same antigen receptor is shown on a cell that has been infected with the antigen. So we're looking at either a white blood cell or a cell. They're presenting the antigen to the T cell. The T cell then duplicates, so there are many cells that attack the same antigen. And we have two different types. We have killer T cells, which will destroy the infected cell, and a helper T cell, which will help to activate B cells. So let's break this down, this big blurb of words, into how the T cells work. So number one, T cells come across a white blood cell or an infected cell that is presenting the antigen. So the term presenting means showing. Maybe I'll write that in there for you. Presenting/showing the antigen. So T cells develop the same pattern or the same shape and makeup. We'll add that in there as well. So the same pattern or shape that is presented to them so that they can attach to the infected cell. Clarify that even a little bit further. So the T cells develop the same pattern or shape of antigen that is presented to them so that they can attach to the infected cell. So basically the T cell comes across the white blood cell or infected cell that's showing the antigen. The T cell then develops the same pattern or shape of that presented antigen and then can attach to that infected cell via the antigen presented. So after they've done that, T cells replicate themselves, so there are many T cells to fight the infected cells. So T cells attach to cells that are infected and presenting antigens, because as soon as an antigen gets infected, they actually show or as soon as the cell gets infected, they show the antigen so that other cells know and T cells know, you know what, I'm infected, you need to destroy me, I'm going to make you sick. So like I say, T cells attach to those cells that are infected and then destroy the cell. So killer T cells destroy cells, while helper T cells help to activate B cells. And then, so after we have all these T cells that can attack and help activate other cells, memory T cells are developed to quickly remember the antigen that is presented. So in the future, the T cells can kill off cells infected with that antigen immediately. So just like we had memory B cells that were remembering, okay, we have to create this antibody, we have memory T cells that replicate themselves so that there are multiple T cells that can go and kill off those infected cells right away. So there's a summary video, everything here. I think that it would be really, really helpful for you to watch that video as well, because it's nice to have visuals of these things, and this does a really good job of visually explaining everything. It goes into a little bit more detail for some of the terminology than you probably need. We just need to know what's in these notes here. And that's basically how the B cells work, how the T cells work, and between the two of these, so our antibodies are ready to fight the antigen and our T cells are ready to kill off any cells that become infected. That is how our specific immune system works. So again, take a look at this video. I think it'll be really helpful just to clarify any of these issues.